Welcome to Honeybee, real stories of love, lies, and betrayal, where every truth stings. Let's begin. My name is Darren, and this is a story of how my wife's so-called social media challenge ended up destroying her career, our marriage, and any respect I had left for her. Back in 2018, when Vanessa and I tied the knot, I never imagined she'd one day betray me. We were both in our late 20s, working hard to build our careers, and genuinely excited to start a future together. I was a software project manager, and she was steadily rising through the ranks of a mid-sized tech company's marketing department. We had good jobs, a cozy apartment, and what felt like limitless potential ahead of us. Those first few years were everything I had hoped married life would be. We had weekly date nights, took impromptu weekend getaways, and could hardly keep our hands off each other. Vanessa was warm, funny, and genuinely loved spending time with me. She would wait up for me on nights I worked late, and I often surprised her with flowers, even if it was just an ordinary Tuesday. By our fourth year, things naturally began to slow down. We weren't as intensely wrapped up in each other as we'd been during the honeymoon stage, but I saw that as a normal and healthy shift. We were both moving up at work, taking on bigger responsibilities, and our relationship had settled into a stable, mature rhythm. The passion of the early days had grown into something deeper, a comfortable companionship built on shared goals and trust. Vanessa seemed happy with this transition too, and we both focused on advancing our careers while we were still young and without kids. But gradually, her work hours started stretching later and later. She had always been dedicated to her job, but now she was staying at the office until 8 or 9 most nights. She'd come home drained, grab a quick dinner while scrolling on her phone, and go straight to bed. Weekends, which we used to spend together, were now interrupted by urgent work emergencies. She'd spend Saturday mornings glued to her laptop, dealing with problems she said couldn't wait until Monday. I brushed it off, assuming this was just the price of her new promotion to marketing director. Managing a bigger team and larger projects seemed like a natural reason for the stress. When she collapsed on the couch at night, I'd massage her shoulders and listen to her vent about demanding clients and tight deadlines. Around this time, though, our intimacy started to fade. Vanessa was always tired, always preoccupied, and often too stressed to connect physically. What had once been spontaneous and frequent became scheduled and rare. When I tried to initiate intimacy, she'd often say she was too exhausted or had to finish work on her laptop. Again, I convinced myself this was normal. We were in our early 30s with demanding jobs, and this was simply part of growing older together. I figured once Vanessa settled into her new role, things would level out and we could start thinking about a family. What I didn't realize was that this wasn't just work stress. It was the beginning of Vanessa emotionally stepping away from our marriage. I wouldn't learn the full truth for nearly 2 years, but the first real warning sign came around our 6th anniversary. I wanted to do something meaningful to bring us closer, so I planned a romantic surprise dinner at home. I bought an expensive bottle of wine we both loved, cooked her favorite pasta from scratch, lit candles all over the dining room, and even bought fresh flowers for the table. Vanessa usually finished work around 6:30 p.m., but lately she had been coming home closer to 8:30. I scheduled dinner for 8 o'clock, expecting she'd remember our anniversary and try to leave work on time. At 6 o'clock, I texted her to let her know I had a surprise waiting and asked her to try to get home early. She replied with heart emojis, saying she couldn't wait to see what I had planned. 7 o'clock passed, no Vanessa. I texted again, asking if she was on her way. She replied that she was running late because of a big presentation and would be home as soon as possible. By 8:30, the food was cold, the candles were burning low, and I tried calling her. No answer. At 9:30, she finally texted to say the meeting was still going and apologized for the delay. She walked through the door at 10 p.m., looking completely drained and carrying her laptop bag. She saw the romantic setup and apologized, saying the client meeting had been a nightmare and she'd had to stay late to fix it. But instead of sitting down to enjoy the meal, she said she was too tired to appreciate it, grabbed a yogurt from the fridge, told me we could do it properly on the weekend, and went straight to shower and bed. I sat there at that table, staring at the melted candles and the food that had been waiting for hours, and something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about work stress. She had chosen a meeting over our anniversary, and when she finally came home, she couldn't even fake interest in the effort I'd put in. I wanted to argue, to yell, to demand answers, but I held back. I knew that speaking while angry would only lead to saying things I might regret. I decided to wait a few days and approach her calmly. 3 days later, I asked if we could talk. I explained how distant I had been feeling from her, how our intimacy had declined, and how I felt like we were living more like roommates than spouses. I told her how hurt I was by what happened on our anniversary, and how it seemed like her job always came first. Her response was dismissive. She said nothing was wrong with our marriage, that I was overthinking normal changes, and that work had kept her from coming home early. We could celebrate any time. She said all couples go through less romantic phases, and accused me of being unrealistic for expecting us to act like newlyweds forever. I tried to explain that this wasn't about romance, but about feeling like we no longer prioritize each other. She changed the topic to her upcoming promotion and insisted this was an important time for her career. I left that conversation feeling unheard. Her calm dismissal actually hurt worse than if she had gotten angry. At least anger would have shown she cared. Instead, she acted like my concerns didn't even deserve discussion. Over the next several months, things got worse. Vanessa was consistently working late 4 or 5 nights a week. She took calls during dinner, responded to texts at all hours, and weekend work emergencies became routine. Our physical relationship dwindled to once every few weeks, and even then, it felt more like a chore to her than genuine passion. I coped by throwing myself into my own work. I stayed late at the office, volunteered for extra projects, and took assignments that required travel. If Vanessa was going to prioritize her job, I figured I might as well do the same. But it didn't help. It just made me feel like we were two strangers sharing an apartment. Eventually, I confided in a close friend I'd known for years. I explained everything: the distance, her long hours, how I felt like I was slowly losing my wife. He listened carefully, then asked pointed questions about her behavior. When the late night started, whether I knew her project details, and if I had noticed other changes. When I answered, his face grew serious. He shared how he'd gone through something similar. His girlfriend had acted the same way before he discovered she was cheating. He suggested I consider hiring a private investigator. At first, I resisted. It felt like a huge violation of trust. But my friend reminded me that trust should be based on truth, not blind faith, and that knowing the truth was better than living in doubt. I thought about it for a month before finally making the call. The decision came after a particularly suspicious week. Vanessa said she had a client dinner that lasted until 11 p.m. Thursday and a Friday emergency planning session. That went until 9 p.m. When I asked for details, her answers were vague and didn't quite add up. The investigator was professional, explaining what he could do, how much it would cost, and how long it might take. He said most cases were resolved within 4 to 6 weeks, depending on how cautious the subject was. Those 6 weeks were some of the hardest of my life. I acted normal while quietly scrutinizing everything. Every late night, every outfit, every work text. Ironically, during this time, Vanessa seemed happier than ever. If I hadn't been suspicious already, I might have thought she was just thriving at work. In mid-December, I got the call. The investigator had concrete proof of an affair with one of her company's sales directors. He had photos of them at restaurants, checking into hotels, and meeting at places that clearly weren't work-related. He even obtained credit card records proving many of her so-called business meals were actually dates. The timeline showed the affair had been going on for about a year, meaning she was already involved with him during our anniversary. Suddenly, everything made sense. The long hours, the excuses, the emotional distance. I sat with that knowledge for 3 days before confronting her. When I finally did, I waited until we were home, then asked her directly why she would cheat on me. She froze, tried to deny it at first, then realized from my tone that I had proof. When I showed her the photos and documentation, she broke down crying, but instead of apologizing, she offered the most ridiculous excuse I'd ever heard. She claimed this was part of a TikTok marriage challenge, where you pull away to see if your spouse fights to win you back. She said the affair was a way to test whether we were truly meant to be together. That excuse made me angrier than the cheating itself. She had turned her betrayal into some twisted experiment. I told her I was filing for divorce. She begged, cried, promised to end things with him and focus on us, but the damage was already done. Even if her TikTok story had been true, which I doubt, she had still chosen to risk our marriage, her career, and my trust instead of talking to me like an adult. The next day, I contacted a divorce lawyer. The process took weeks, and living together during that time was brutal. Vanessa alternated between pleading for forgiveness and raging that I wouldn't give her another chance. When the papers were ready, I handed them to her, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. I still loved her, but love wasn't enough to rebuild trust that had been shattered so completely. The divorce went relatively smoothly, since we didn't have kids or complicated finances. But Vanessa faced consequences beyond the marriage ending. Word of the affair spread through her company, and HR launched an investigation. They discovered she and her co-worker had been using company resources for personal meetings, charging romantic dinners as business expenses, and even claiming personal trips as work travel. Both she and her lover were fired for violating company policy. Losing her job forced Vanessa into freelancing, giving up the salary, benefits, and career path she had worked years to build. Her lover's life collapsed too. Between his messy divorce and being unemployed, he couldn't sustain his lifestyle. Almost a year later, I still don't know if Vanessa's TikTok excuse was real or just a desperate lie. It doesn't matter. Whether she believed it or not, she still chose to cheat instead of communicating with me. She still chose to lie for months rather than fix what was broken. This experience taught me a hard truth. Some people will say or do anything to avoid taking responsibility. Vanessa's excuse was just another way to blame me, as if my failure to fight for her justified her affair. But I know better now. Our marriage didn't fail because I didn't pass her test. It failed because she chose betrayal over honesty. And that choice says everything about her character, not my worth as a husband. The most important lesson I learned is that real love doesn't require games or tests. Couples who are committed work through problems together. They don't create more problems to see how their partner will react. Vanessa's affair wasn't a test. It was the end of our marriage.